There's a truth that for nearly 2 millennia has been carefully guarded, protected, and in many cases deliberately hidden by the corridors of global religious power. A truth so revolutionary its full revelation could shake the fundamental pillars of one of Earth's most powerful institutions. We're talking about the real possibility that Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene had descendants, and that these sacred bloodlines still walk among us today, carrying in their veins the genetic and spiritual heritage of the man who changed human history forever. Imagine for a moment the magnitude of this revelation. For centuries, we've been taught to accept a specific version of Jesus' story, a carefully constructed narrative that emphasizes his divine nature while minimizing, or completely ignoring, his full humanity. But what if that official narrative was just one part of the story? What if there were entire chapters that were deliberately removed, buried in secret archives, or simply erased from humanity's collective memory? The implications are absolutely extraordinary. If Jesus truly had descendants, it would mean his message, his spiritual energy, and even his biological makeup continued to flow through generations, creating a sacred lineage that spread across the globe. These descendants wouldn't just be ordinary folks. They'd carry within them a unique spiritual inheritance, a direct connection to the man Christians consider the Son of God. But why would this information be so dangerous for certain institutions? The answer lies in the very foundation of organized religious power. If Jesus had an earthly family, if he lived as a complete man with deep human relationships, it would fundamentally challenge many of the doctrines that underpin institutional control over faith. Even more, if his descendants exist today, it would raise profound questions about spiritual authority, divine succession, and the true role of the Church as an intermediary between God and humanity. Mary Magdalene emerges in this narrative not as the marginalized figure she's often portrayed, but as a central, powerful, and transformative presence in Jesus' life. Archaeological evidence and ancient texts suggest she was far more than a mere follower. Some scholars propose she was a spiritual leader in her own right, possessing deep esoteric knowledge and an equal partner to Jesus in his earthly mission. This perspective completely revolutionizes our understanding of early Christianity and the role of women in shaping the Christian faith. The official story tells us Mary Magdalene was a redeemed sinner, but modern investigations paint a radically different picture. Gnostic texts discovered in the 20th century reveal a Mary Magdalene who was not only close to Jesus, but possessed a unique understanding of his deepest teachings. The Gospel of Philip, for example, suggests a special intimacy between Jesus and Mary that goes far beyond a simple teacher-student relationship. But where are the possible descendants of this sacred union today? Some fascinating theories suggest that after the crucifixion, Mary Magdalene fled to the south of France, carrying with her not just the memory of Jesus' teachings, but also his biological offspring. Local legends in regions like Provence speak of a mysterious woman who arrived by sea, bringing with her secrets that forever changed the spiritual landscape of the area. The Cathars, a Christian sect that flourished in the south of France during the 12th and 13th centuries, claimed to possess secret knowledge about the true nature of Jesus and his family. They were brutally persecuted and ultimately eliminated by the Inquisition, but not before spreading their beliefs across Europe. Would it be a coincidence that this persecution happened precisely when these ideas about Jesus' family began to gain traction? The Languedoc region in France became a hub of mystery and speculation. It's here that many researchers believe the first generations of Jesus' descendants settled, eventually intermingling with local nobility and creating bloodlines that would spread throughout Europe. Families with names like Plantard, Sinclair, and Montpezat are frequently mentioned in connection with these theories, though definitive evidence remains elusive. The Catholic Church itself seems to have knowledge of something significant related to this issue. The Vatican maintains one of the world's largest and most secretive archives, containing documents dating back over 1,000 years. Many of these documents have never been seen by outside eyes, and the Church maintains tight control over what's revealed and when. Why such secrecy if there's nothing to hide? Documents occasionally leaked from the Vatican archives suggest the Church is aware of specific bloodlines that trace their ancestry back to the first centuries of Christianity. These documents speak of protected families, guarded secrets, and a truth that must be preserved until the world is ready to receive it. But when will that moment be, and who decides when humanity is ready for the truth? Modern investigation into this theory has gained new momentum with recent archaeological discoveries. Excavations at ancient sites in the Middle East have revealed evidence of early Christian communities that practiced forms of Christianity vastly different from what we know today. These early Christians appear to have had a much more earthly and humanized understanding of Jesus, seeing him not just as a distant divine figure, but as a human leader with family and descendants. The Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered in the mid-20th century, revealed a much more complex religious landscape in first-century Palestine than previously imagined. These texts suggest that Jesus may have been part of a larger spiritual tradition, one that included sacred marriage and the continuation of spiritual lineages through biological offspring. If that's true, then the idea of Jesus having descendants wouldn't just be possible but expected within the context of his era. The Gnostic documents discovered in Nag Hammadi, Egypt, in 1945 provided even more intriguing evidence about the nature of the relationship between Jesus and Mary Magdalene. These ancient texts, which were carefully hidden for centuries, present a radically different view of early Christianity. In the Gospel of Philip, one of these Gnostic texts, there's a passage describing Jesus kissing Mary Magdalene on the mouth and referring to her as his companion. Scholars intensely debate the meaning of this language, but many agree it suggests a far more intimate relationship than official Christian tradition has ever admitted. The Gospel of Mary Magdalene, another text discovered in this treasure trove of ancient documents, presents Mary not just as a follower, but as a spiritual leader in her own right, someone who received special teachings from Jesus that even the other disciples didn't know. This portrayal of Mary as a central figure in the early Christian community raises profound questions about why her importance was systematically erased from the official narrative. If she was truly Jesus' companion and mother of his children, then her marginalization by early church leaders makes sense from a political perspective. A male-dominated church would have every reason to diminish the role of a woman who could claim supreme authority as the widow of its founder. Oral traditions preserved in certain Middle Eastern Christian communities tell stories that never found their way into the official texts of the New Testament. These traditions speak of Jesus as a married rabbi, of Mary Magdalene as a woman of noble family, and of children who were secretly taken to safe locations after the crucifixion. While these oral traditions cannot be verified through conventional historical methods, they persist with remarkable consistency across different communities and regions, suggesting they may preserve authentic memories of real events. Modern genealogical analysis offers powerful tools to investigate claims of ancient descent. DNA studies of families who have long claimed descent from Jesus have revealed interesting genetic patterns that suggest Middle Eastern origins dating back approximately 2,000 years. While it's impossible to definitively prove a connection to Jesus through genetic evidence alone, due to the temporal distance involved, these studies at least confirm that some of these families do indeed have ancestral roots in the right region and era. Independent researchers have traced specific bloodlines through historical records, church documents, and genealogical archives, building family trees that stretch across centuries. Some of these lineages lead to European noble families, others to isolated communities that have preserved unique traditions, and still others to ordinary individuals who may not be aware of their supposed extraordinary heritage. The work is meticulous and often controversial, but it's revealing connections that deserve serious investigation. The Merovingian dynasty, which ruled parts of France in the 6th and 7th centuries, has been the subject of particular interest in this investigation. Historical documents suggest this dynasty claimed descent from a divine or semi-divine figure, and some researchers theorize that this claim may have been based on actual descent from Jesus. The Merovingians were known for their unorthodox religious practices and their resistance to papal authority, behaviors that would make sense if they believed they possessed spiritual legitimacy independent of the official church. Can you imagine what it would be like to discover that you carry the blood of the most influential figure in human history in your veins? This possibility isn't as remote as it might seem. Population studies suggest that anyone who lived 2,000 years ago and left descendants likely has millions of living descendants today. If Jesus had children, then statistically speaking, millions of people currently alive could be his descendants. The question isn't whether descendants exist, but rather if we can identify them and if they're aware of their heritage. Symbolism found in ancient art and architecture sometimes preserves clues about truths that couldn't be expressed directly. Gothic cathedrals contain intriguing images of Mary Magdalene in positions of honor, sometimes depicted with symbols traditionally associated with royalty or divine motherhood. Leonardo da Vinci's famous painting, The Last Supper, has been the subject of intense scrutiny by those who believe it contains coded messages about the true nature of the relationship between Jesus and Mary Magdalene. While some of these interpretations may be speculative, they reflect a persistent tradition of hidden knowledge being preserved through artistic means. The Knights Templar, the famous Crusader Knights, have been connected to these theories through their supposed discovery of significant documents or artifacts during their occupation of Jerusalem. After their dramatic dissolution in the 14th century, many Templars fled to places like Scotland, where they established communities that preserved unique traditions and knowledge. Some of these traditions speak of a supreme secret related to the true nature of Jesus and his family. While direct evidence is scarce, the persistence of these traditions across centuries suggests they may contain elements of historical truth. Modern investigation into this issue faces unique challenges. Relevant documents may be hidden in private archives, lost to history, or deliberately destroyed by those who would prefer to keep certain secrets buried. The Catholic Church, despite its growing openness in many areas, maintains rigid control over documents that could shed light on this question. Independent researchers must work with fragments of evidence, building theories based on incomplete and often contradictory clues. Modern technology is providing new tools for this investigation. Advanced dating techniques can verify the authenticity of ancient documents, while DNA analysis can trace lineages with unprecedented accuracy. Ground-penetrating radar is revealing hidden archaeological sites that may contain crucial evidence. As these technologies become more sophisticated and accessible, our ability to investigate historical claims dramatically improves. The potential impact of definitively proving the existence of Jesus' descendants would be seismic for the religious world. Different Christian denominations would react in vastly different ways to such a revelation. Some might embrace the discovery as confirmation of Jesus' real humanity, while others might reject it as dangerous heresy. The political implications would also be enormous, particularly in regions where religion and politics are intimately intertwined. The very possibility that direct descendants of Jesus still live among us raises profound questions about religious authority and scriptural interpretation. For centuries, the Church established its legitimacy partly on the idea that Jesus left no earthly offspring, making the apostles and their successors the sole legitimate heirs of his message. If biological descendants truly existed, it would create a completely different form of spiritual authority, based on bloodline rather than apostolic succession. This tension between spiritual authority and genetic inheritance isn't unique to Christianity, but its implications are particularly profound. Given the universal nature of the Christian message, recent investigations in molecular genealogy have revealed surprising family connections that span millennia. Studies of populations in the Middle East show that many families have preserved detailed genealogical records through oral traditions that stretch back dozens of generations. In some communities, especially among minority groups that have maintained distinct identities through historical persecutions, these genealogical traditions are considered sacred and are passed down with extreme care. Some of these bloodlines claim direct connections to biblical figures, including not only Jesus, but also other significant New Testament characters. The preservation of such genealogical traditions faces unique challenges in an era of globalization and cultural assimilation. Families who for centuries held knowledge of their special origins now face the difficult decision of whether to reveal or continue concealing their identities. Some have chosen anonymity, understanding that public revelation could bring unwanted attention, persecution, or commercial exploitation. Others have begun sharing their stories with trusted researchers, contributing to a growing body of anecdotal evidence that, while not definitive proof, forms an intriguing pattern. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to get notifications of new videos about historical mysteries and revelations that could change our understanding of the past. Your subscription helps us continue investigating these fascinating topics and sharing discoveries with you. The role of women in preserving these genealogical traditions deserves special attention. In many Middle Eastern cultures, women traditionally served as guardians of family history, memorizing complex genealogies and transmitting them to their daughters and daughters-in-law. This matrilineal tradition of knowledge preservation may have been crucial for keeping alive the memory of connections to biblical figures. Mary Magdalene, if she truly was Jesus' wife and mother of his children, would have established a lineage through which such knowledge could be passed down. The special veneration of Mary Magdalene in certain early Christian traditions may reflect recognition of her role not just as a disciple, but as a matriarch of a spiritual dynasty. Documents found in the Vatican archives and other ancient religious collections sometimes contain enigmatic references to special families that receive protection or particular privileges from the early church. While these references are often vague and can have multiple interpretations, they suggest that certain bloodlines were considered significant by early Christian leaders. Some of these families may have been granted special status precisely because of their alleged connections to Jesus or other important biblical figures. The question of scientific verification for these claims presents unique challenges. DNA testing requires reference samples for comparison, but obviously, we don't have genetic material from Jesus to use as a standard. However, genetic analysis of populations can identify unique markers that are common in certain geographical regions and ethnic groups. If multiple families claiming descent from Jesus shared specific genetic markers that are rare in the general population, it could provide circumstantial evidence of a common origin. Such evidence wouldn't prove descent from Jesus specifically, but it could support claims that these families share a common ancestor from the appropriate region and period. Leave your comments below on what you think about this possibility. Do you believe descendants of Jesus still live among us? What evidence would be needed to convince you? Your participation enriches our discussion and helps other viewers explore different perspectives on this fascinating topic. Geography also plays a crucial role in this investigation. Certain regions of the world have notably high concentrations of families claiming biblical descent. Southern France, particularly the area around Rennes-le-Château, has been a focus of intense attention due to persistent local traditions about Mary Magdalene having lived and died there. Some local families maintain oral traditions claiming descent from her and, by extension, from Jesus. While many of these claims may be romanticized or fabricated, the persistence and specificity of some family traditions suggest they may contain kernels of historical truth. Scotland has also emerged as a place of particular interest, partly due to historical connections with the Templars, but also because of certain Scottish noble families who maintain unusual genealogical traditions. Some of these families possess ancient documents and artifacts that claim to attest to their special origins. While the authenticity of these materials is often questionable, some have shown characteristics that are consistent with genuine ancient provenance. The preservation of esoteric knowledge through secret societies adds another layer of complexity to this investigation. Organizations like the Rosicrucians, the Historical Illuminati, and various Masonic orders claim to preserve ancient traditions related to the true origins of Christianity. Some of these traditions encompass specific knowledge regarding the descendants of Jesus and their role in later history. While much of this knowledge leans symbolic or allegorical rather than literal, it might still preserve distorted recollections of actual historical events. Modern commercial interests have significantly complicated this field of inquiry. Popular books, films, and television shows have generated public demand for sensational revelations about Jesus and his family, often incentivizing some researchers to make exaggerated claims based on flimsy evidence. This commercialization of the mystery makes it harder for serious scholars to be taken seriously, and for the public to differentiate between legitimate investigation and sensationalist speculation. Nevertheless, recent archaeological research has unearthed findings that could be relevant to this question. Excavations at first-century sites in Palestine continue to yield evidence on how families of that era preserved genealogical records and familial traditions. Some of these discoveries suggest that certain lineage preservation practices were more sophisticated and enduring than previously understood by academics. Documents found at Qumran and other locations demonstrate that Jewish communities of that period maintained detailed genealogical records, especially for families holding religious or political significance. If Jesus indeed had descendants, it's plausible that such records were kept by communities recognizing the importance of preserving this lineage. The question of ancient document survival also merits serious consideration. Libraries and monasteries worldwide continue to unveil previously unknown manuscripts that shed new light on early Christianity. The Vatican, in particular, holds one of the world's largest collections of ancient documents, many of which remain uncatalogued or inaccessible to independent researchers. Experts who have gained limited access to these archives have reported seeing documents hinting at alternative versions of the official narrative concerning Jesus and his family. While these accounts are challenging to verify due to restricted access, they fuel speculation about what information might be deliberately kept under wraps. Eastern Orthodox traditions have preserved some narratives concerning Jesus' family that diverge significantly from Western versions. Certain churches in Ethiopia, Armenia, and other regions maintain ancient texts that include details about the descendants of important biblical figures. These documents, while not considered canonical by the Catholic Church, were safeguarded by Christian communities claiming direct connections to Jesus' earliest followers. Some of these texts specifically mention the existence of descendants and provide particulars about their later lives and fates. The analysis of ancient art and symbolism has also contributed to this investigation. Paintings, sculptures, and other artifacts from early centuries of Christianity sometimes incorporate elements that might represent knowledge about Jesus' family, not preserved in written texts. Experts in Christian iconography have identified recurring symbols in medieval and Renaissance art that could reference traditions concerning Jesus' descendants. While the interpretation of these symbols is necessarily speculative, they suggest that knowledge on this topic may have been transmitted through artistic and symbolic channels even when suppressed in official texts. The role of women in preserving family traditions also merits particular attention. In many ancient cultures, including first-century Jewish society, women were often responsible for maintaining oral traditions and familial knowledge. If Mary Magdalene indeed fled to Gaul after the crucifixion, as some traditions suggest, she could have established a lineage that preserved both her identity and knowledge of her connection to Jesus. Matrilineal traditions of sacred knowledge preservation exist in numerous cultures and may have allowed information about Jesus' descendants to be kept alive even when lost in dominant male-centric official records. Modern investigations into population migration during the early centuries of the Christian era have revealed patterns consistent with some claims concerning Jesus' descendants. Genetic studies of Mediterranean and European populations have identified migratory movements from the Middle East westward during the appropriate period. While these movements have various explanations, including religious persecution, trade, and military conquest, they demonstrate that it was feasible for Jewish families of that era to settle in distant regions and maintain their distinctive identities across centuries. The preservation of distinctive religious practices among certain communities also offers intriguing clues. Some groups claiming descent from Jesus have maintained religious traditions that diverge from both mainstream Christianity and traditional Judaism. These hybrid practices might represent the preservation of specific traditions from Jesus' immediate family that were lost in other Christian lineages. While many of these traditions have inevitably been modified over the centuries, they may contain elements reflecting genuine religious practices of Jesus' earliest followers. Documents discovered in the archives of extinct religious orders have occasionally revealed references to families with special status due to their alleged origins. Some of these documents suggest that certain medieval orders maintained knowledge about the descendants of biblical figures and even provided protection or special privileges for such families. While many of these references are vague or symbolic, they indicate that the possibility of Jesus having descendants was taken seriously by some medieval religious authorities. The question of motivation for preserving or suppressing such knowledge is also crucial for understanding the available evidence. If descendants of Jesus truly existed, different groups would have had varying reasons to either preserve or conceal this knowledge. Some families may have kept their traditions private to avoid persecution, while others might have leveraged claims of descent to gain social or political status. The institutional church would have had complex and sometimes contradictory motives, at times seeking to suppress claims that challenged its authority, yet at other times wanting to preserve connections to Jesus' sacred family. Contemporary investigations into ancient manuscripts continue to uncover intriguing references that may be related to the question of Jesus' descendants. Monastic libraries that have preserved texts for centuries sometimes contain documents mentioning families with special lineages or differentiated status. Some of these manuscripts make coded references to groups that upheld particular traditions of veneration or distinctive religious practices. Although many of these texts were penned centuries after the events they describe, they may preserve oral traditions dating back to the earliest days of Christianity. The language employed in these documents frequently uses symbolism and metaphors that could obscure more direct meanings about family lineages. Researchers studying these texts note that references to sacred royal blood or blessed families appear with sufficient frequency to suggest they represent more than mere religious symbolism. Archaeology also contributes discoveries that may be related to the preservation of familial traditions linked to Jesus. Excavations at first-century sites in Palestine have brought to light evidence of early Christian communities that maintained distinctive practices. Some of these sites feature inscriptions or symbols that differ from those found in other ancient Christian communities. These distinctions could indicate that certain communities preserved specific traditions that were lost elsewhere. Ritual objects uncovered at these sites sometimes exhibit influences combining Jewish and Christian elements in unique ways. Such syncretism might reflect practices upheld by families possessing direct knowledge of Jesus' immediate family traditions. Linguistic studies of oral traditions preserved in remote communities occasionally identify elements that may have very ancient origins. Some communities claiming descent from Jesus have maintained prayers, chants, or narratives containing archaic Aramaic or other linguistic features suggesting first-century origins. While oral transmission inevitably modifies texts over time, certain core elements can remain relatively stable for many centuries. Linguists who have studied these traditions note that some contain phrases or concepts not appearing in mainstream Christian literature, but consistent with knowledge that could have come directly from Jesus' family. The issue of ancient genealogical records remains central to any discussion concerning Jesus' descendants. During the early centuries of the Christian era, some Jewish families maintained detailed records of their lineages, particularly those asserting descent from significant biblical figures. While many of these records were lost during persecutions or due to the passage of time, some may have survived in modified forms. Families that migrated to distant regions sometimes preserved genealogical traditions even when they lost other aspects of their cultural heritage. These familial traditions might contain information about connections to Jesus' family that do not appear in official church records. The influence of medieval politics on the preservation or destruction of evidence regarding Jesus' descendants must also be considered. During certain periods, claims of descent from Jesus could provide significant political or religious legitimacy. Noble families sometimes fabricated or exaggerated such connections to bolster their claims to power. However, the prevalence of fraudulent claims does not mean all assertions were false. Some families might have had genuine connections that were later appropriated or distorted by other groups seeking political legitimacy. The existence of false claims may even have served to obscure genuine lineages, creating a situation where truth and fiction became challenging to distinguish. Medieval military orders, such as the Knights Templar, are sometimes linked to theories concerning the preservation of knowledge related to Jesus' descendants. While many assertions about these orders are speculative, genuine historical documents indicate they had access to knowledge and artifacts from the Middle East unavailable to other European groups. Some of these orders maintained extensive libraries and safeguarded texts lost elsewhere. If knowledge about Jesus' descendants existed, organizations like these would have possessed both the resources and the motivation to preserve it. Their contacts in the Middle East could also have provided access to traditions that did not reach Europe through official ecclesiastical channels. The role of women in preserving familial traditions warrants particular attention when considering potential descendants of Jesus. In many ancient cultures, including first-century Jewish culture, women were entrusted with maintaining certain family traditions and passing knowledge to subsequent generations. If Mary Magdalene or other women close to Jesus had children, they likely would have played a central role in preserving memories and traditions about Jesus that do not appear in the male-dominated accounts of ancient Christian sources. Matrilineal traditions of sacred knowledge preservation could have allowed information about Jesus' family to be transmitted through channels that largely remained invisible to male ecclesiastical authorities. Modern discoveries in population genetics offer new perspectives on the possibility of tracing descendants of ancient historical figures. While it's impossible to identify specific descendants of Jesus using genetic evidence alone, studies of Mediterranean populations have revealed patterns of migration and population admixture consistent with some claims concerning the preservation of ancient lineages. Certain populations exhibit genetic markers suggesting Middle Eastern origins during periods appropriate for descent from first-century families. These data cannot specifically prove descent from Jesus, but they demonstrate that genetic lineages from that period and region could have persisted into modern times across various European and Middle Eastern populations. The analysis of artistic traditions and religious symbolism within communities claiming descent from Jesus also reveals intriguing patterns. Some of these communities have maintained distinctive artistic traditions that incorporate symbols or motifs diverging from mainstream Christianity. These artistic elements sometimes exhibit influences combining Jewish, early Christian, and even elements that may reflect esoteric knowledge about Jesus and his family. While religious art inevitably evolves over time, certain core elements can preserve memories of traditions dating back to Jesus' earliest followers. The issue of official documentation regarding potential descendants of Jesus presents unique challenges that historians face when investigating any claim of this nature. First-century official records were limited, and many common families did not appear in governmental documents, especially if they lacked significant property or political status. Jesus hailed from a family of artisans in a remote Roman imperial province, precisely the kind of background least likely to generate comprehensive official documentation. Even more prominent families from this period often left few surviving records, making the absence of official documentation less significant than it might initially appear. Modern academic investigations have identified various oral traditions in Mediterranean communities that have preserved narratives concerning ancient familial connections to significant religious figures. While these traditions cannot be independently verified, they follow consistent patterns of communal memory preservation that anthropologists recognize as valid methods of historical transmission in traditional cultures. Some of these traditions include details about migration, community establishment, and distinctive religious practices that align with what we know about the dispersal of early Christian communities following events like the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 CE. The role of women in preserving these traditions cannot be overstated when we consider how information about Jesus' family might have been transmitted. Mary Magdalene, as a prominent figure among Jesus' earliest followers, would have had access to information about his personal and familial life that perhaps wasn't known to all male disciples. If she indeed bore children with Jesus, or knew other family members who had descendants, she would have been uniquely positioned to preserve and transmit this knowledge. Traditional cultures frequently relied on women to maintain family genealogies and associated traditions, particularly when these traditions held religious or spiritual significance. Analyses of Gnostic texts and other early Christian writings excluded from the official biblical canon reveal alternative perspectives on the nature of the relationship between Jesus and Mary Magdalene. While these texts were composed decades or centuries after Jesus' life, they may preserve ancient traditions circulating within certain Christian communities. The Gospel of Philip, for instance, describes Mary Magdalene as Jesus' special companion and suggests an intimacy between them that extends beyond a merely spiritual relationship. Although scholars debate the historicity of these descriptions, they indicate that at least some early Christian communities believed Jesus had close personal relationships that could have resulted in offspring. The preservation of traditions concerning Jesus' descendants would also have faced significant political and religious pressures as Christianity became institutionalized. The early church confronted considerable challenges in establishing doctrinal and organizational authority, especially when competing with other interpretations of Christianity circulating in different communities. Claims about direct descendants of Jesus could have posed a threat to emerging ecclesiastical authority, creating incentives to suppress or discredit such assertions. Families who believed they had genetic connections to Jesus would have had practical reasons to keep these beliefs private or confined to trusted circles. Archaeological evidence from sites associated with early Christian communities occasionally uncovers artifacts or inscriptions, suggesting familial traditions that diverge from official church narratives. While none of these discoveries provide direct evidence of Jesus' descendants, they demonstrate that a diversity of beliefs and practices existed among ancient Christian communities, far beyond what official sources suggest. Some funerary inscriptions, for example, incorporate symbols or phrases that appear to reflect distinctive traditions regarding Jesus' divine and human nature, not found in canonical texts. The study of modern communities that uphold claims concerning Jesus' descendants reveals interesting patterns in how familial traditions are preserved over extended periods. These communities have often developed distinctive ritual practices, specific culinary traditions, and even linguistic dialects that incorporate elements potentially reflecting ancient origins. While it's impossible to directly verify genealogical claims stretching back 2 millennia, The consistent preservation of distinctive cultural traditions suggests that at least some of these communities have maintained significant cultural continuity from ancient periods. Investigations into medieval manuscripts preserved in monasteries and private libraries occasionally uncover references to families or individuals asserting descent from Jesus. These references typically appear in oblique contexts, such as genealogies of noble families or local chronicles, rather than explicit declarations of divine heritage. The indirect nature of these references may reflect the caution of medieval scribes when recording claims that could be deemed heretical by ecclesiastical authorities. Some of these manuscripts also include references to familial artifacts or traditions purportedly transmitted since apostolic times. The analysis of artistic traditions in communities claiming descent from Jesus also provides further insights. Experts often chew over the idea of ancient memories being preserved. You see it in certain forms of religious art, liturgical music, and sacred architecture, elements that veer off from mainstream church traditions. Sometimes they even weave in symbols or motifs that seem to hint at distinct interpretations of Jesus' life and teachings. While art forms naturally evolve, some core elements just might hold on to echoes of practices or beliefs that stretch back to the earliest Christian communities. Linguistic studies of dialects, particularly those squirreled away in isolated communities claiming ancient ties to biblical figures, occasionally cough up vocabulary or structural elements that echo Aramaic or other ancient Middle Eastern tongues. While these linguistic quirks can't nail down specific genealogical claims, they certainly suggest historical contact with language traditions that could date back to periods relevant to Jesus' family. The way ancient linguistic elements get preserved in these tucked-away communities is a recognized phenomenon, offering real breadcrumbs toward understanding a population's historical roots. The theological fallout from the possibility of Jesus having descendants remains a hot-button issue among religious scholars from all stripes. Some interpretations suggest that a physical lineage wouldn't diminish his divine nature or religious significance one bit. Others, though, argue that such claims fundamentally clash with core Christian doctrines about Christ's unique nature. These theological sparring matches inevitably color how historical evidence for a potential bloodline gets weighed and interpreted by various academic camps. The why behind preserving traditions of Jesus' descendants also needs a serious look when we're sifting through modern claims. Families or communities who've clung to such traditions for centuries have stared down serious risks: religious persecution, social ostracism, even outright violence. Holding on to traditions that could brand you a heretic or put you in danger suggests a genuine conviction in their truth, not some play for cash or social climbing. That kind of grit in the face of adversity can offer circumstantial proof for the authenticity of at least some of these traditions. Modern leaps in DNA analysis have opened up whole new avenues for investigating potential descendants of ancient historical figures. Now it's a dead end trying to pinpoint specific descendants of Jesus using only genetic evidence, since we're missing any reference material from him. But studies of Mediterranean populations have turned up patterns consistent with some claims about ancient bloodlines being preserved. Certain groups exhibit genetic markers that point to a Middle Eastern origin in the relevant time frames, even if the data can't prove descent from specific individuals. The preservation of traditions concerning Jesus' descendants also needs to be viewed within the broader context of how family memories are kept alive in traditional cultures. Many societies have cooked up sophisticated methods to orally preserve genealogies and family traditions over countless generations. These traditions often bake in internal checks and validation methods that help keep accuracy pretty tight over time. While oral traditions will inevitably morph during transmission, core elements can stay remarkably stable, especially when they carry deep religious or cultural weight. The role of Jewish communities in preserving potential traditions about Jesus' family presents some particularly intriguing angles on this whole puzzle. Jesus was, after all, Jewish, and his family connections would have been woven into the fabric of the first-century Palestinian Jewish community. Some Jewish traditions have actually preserved narratives about Jesus that diverge pretty significantly from Christian accounts. It's plausible that info about his family might also be tucked away in Jewish sources that remain largely untouched by Christian scholars. Digging into these traditions could very well unearth additional perspectives on the question of Jesus' descendants. The ongoing discoveries of ancient texts keep throwing new light on early Christianity and Jesus' life. The Dead Sea Scrolls, the Nag Hammadi codices, and other archaeological finds have laid bare a far greater diversity within ancient Christian and Jewish communities than we ever knew. As more texts surface and get translated, it's entirely possible that additional evidence regarding Jesus' family and potential descendants might just pop up. These discoveries continuously broaden our understanding of the historical backdrop against which claims about Jesus' descendants need to be weighed. The question of physical evidence concerning Jesus' descendants also stretches to family artifacts and relics that some communities claim to have inherited from ancient times. While definitively verifying the authenticity of such objects is a near impossible task, some do exhibit characteristics consistent with an ancient origin and could potentially preserve material traditions about Jesus' family. Scientific analysis of a few of these artifacts has revealed manufacturing techniques and materials appropriate for ancient periods, though, to be clear, that doesn't prove a specific origin or a direct link to Jesus. The impact of a potential Jesus lineage on modern understandings of Christianity would remain significant, regardless of how much definitive evidence ever comes to light. The sheer possibility that Jesus had descendants challenges certain traditional interpretations of his nature and mission, while at the same time potentially enriching others. These theological implications ensure that interest in a possible Jesus bloodline will likely keep fueling historical and archaeological research, no matter how tough it is to dig up conclusive evidence. Traditions specifically naming Mary Magdalene as the potential mother of Jesus' descendants deserve particular scrutiny, given her unique standing among his followers. The canonical Gospels paint her as a witness to the crucifixion and the first person to encounter Jesus after the resurrection, hinting at an exceptionally close and trusted relationship. If Jesus did indeed have intimate relationships that led to offspring, Mary Magdalene would be a logical candidate based on the biblical evidence of her closeness to him and her prominence among his disciples. The preservation of traditions about Jesus' descendants through female channels of transmission could also shed light on why such traditions have largely stayed out of the male-dominated sources that fill ancient historical records. In many traditional cultures, women maintained separate spheres of knowledge and tradition, not fully accessible to male authorities, whether religious or secular. If information about Jesus' family was primarily passed down through female lineages, that could explain both its survival and its relative invisibility in official accounts. Final thoughts on this complex conundrum must acknowledge both the evidentiary limitations and the genuine historical possibilities it throws our way. While definitive proof for Jesus' descendants will likely remain a ghost in the fog, the convergence of traditions, circumstantial evidence, and archaeological finds suggests the possibility just can't be completely written off. The ongoing investigation into these claims adds to our broader understanding of early Christianity and the historical context of Jesus' life, regardless of any specific conclusions about lineage. The question of descendants from Jesus and Mary Magdalene remains one of the most fascinating and controversial historical investigations of our time. While we may never get absolute certainty about the truth of these claims, the investigative journey itself lays bare profound aspects of faith, history, and human nature. The traditions kept alive by communities worldwide, the emerging archaeological discoveries, and the academic analyses continue to provide pieces of a historical jigsaw puzzle that might never be fully solved, but which nonetheless keeps offering invaluable insights into the origins of Christianity and the sheer complexity of the human experience across the centuries.